Imagine a world where the continent that would become the richest nation in history was, for over a century, simply an afterthought. How did the United States of America rise from being ignored wilderness to the single most powerful force on the planet? America is known today as the world's foremost economic, technological, and military power. Yet its rise to prominence was anything but predetermined. Consider this. On maps created just before Christopher Columbus's momentous voyage in the late 15th century, the vastness of the Americas was completely unknown. European cartographers had no idea of the continental landmass that lay to the west, while Viking sagas had vaguely referenced an island, Vinland, to the west. The scope of a new world was unimaginable. Columbus, sailing under the banner of the Spanish crown, sought a westbound trade route to Asia for its prized spices and silks. Instead, in 1492, he landed on the islands of the Caribbean. He never found the spices he expected, but, convinced he was near India, he mistakenly named the indigenous people Indians. He returned to the King and Queen of Spain, Ferdinand II, and Isabella I, with tales not of spices, but of immense quantities of gold. This discovery, the promise of unfathomable mineral wealth, was the explosive detail that instantly shifted the entire focus of the Spanish crown and catalyzed the European age of exploration in the Western Hemisphere. The Spanish monarchs, driven by both religious fervor and economic hunger, immediately recognized the opportunity. They instructed Columbus to return, convert the native populations to Christianity, and, above all else, secure the gold. A few years prior, the Portuguese had already found their reliable route to the riches of Asia by sailing south and around Africa. To prevent an open, costly conflict between the two Catholic powers over the new discoveries, Spain and Portugal appealed to the Pope. This led to the establishment of the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, drawing a spiritual and economic demarcation line down the map. All non-Christian lands to the east of that line would belong to Portugal, while everything to the west, including the bulk of the Americas, would belong to Spain. Portugal concentrated on building a massive maritime trading empire in Asia and Brazil. The Spanish, however, immediately dedicated themselves to conquering and colonizing their half of the New World, a vast endeavor known as the Conquista. The most valuable parts of the Americas, the established civilizations and regions rich in readily accessible gold, silver, and large native populations that could be compelled to labor, were in the southern regions, Mexico, Peru, and the Caribbean islands. This is precisely where Spanish attention and resources were fiercely focused throughout the 16th century. Driven by legendary expeditions like that of Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro, the Spanish built an immense, lucrative empire that dwarfed anything the English or French would establish for generations. In 1539, a Spanish expedition led by Hernando de Soto did venture into North America, exploring what would become the southeastern United States. But critically, finding no immediate, massive wealth in gold and silver to rival the Aztec or Incan treasures, they largely dismissed the northern lands as a useless, frozen fringe of their empire. The English were slow to the game. Surprisingly, the English crown sent its first officially sponsored explorer, John Cabot, to North America as early as 1497, just 5 years after Columbus and 16 years before the Spanish ever reached Florida. Yet, following that initial trip, and facing the daunting naval supremacy of Spain, England waited for nearly a century before attempting any permanent settlement. This period of delay allowed the Spanish to solidify their wealth and dominance. But, as English power grew, the desire to challenge Spain and carve out a piece of the New World grew with it. England's first colonial attempt, established at Roanoke, North Carolina in 1585, was led by Sir Walter Raleigh. It was an initial disaster. The entire colony mysteriously disappeared, becoming the famous Lost Colony. as England became immediately embroiled in a costly naval war with Spain that very year, distracting the Crown from resupply efforts. They tried again at Jamestown, Virginia in 1607, and this time, despite facing initial starvation, disease, and conflict, the colony succeeded, mainly due to the cash crop of tobacco. This established a crucial model. North America would be an agricultural venture, not a gold mine. Soon after, the Pilgrims, a group of strict religious separatists who famously outlawed activities like gambling, dancing, and even celebrating Christmas, arrived at Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620. Their arrival was motivated by a desire for religious freedom, not purely profit, laying the foundation for a distinctive, self-governing society in New England. A massive wave of sustained migration followed, the Great Migration, driven by economic opportunity, political unrest, and religious persecution in Europe. Before long, the narrow coastline stretching from Maine to Georgia was a patchwork of 13 British colonies. These colonies, diverse in their economies and religions, were united by their connection to the British Crown and their tradition of local self-government. While Britain was busy establishing this narrow, profitable eastern foothold, the French were claiming the massive, unpopulated interior lands, establishing New France and controlling crucial waterways like the St. Lawrence River and the entire Mississippi River Valley. This created a colossal territorial tension that was a recipe for global conflict. By 1754, the two powers, Great Britain and France, were on a collision course, ready to decide who would truly dominate the continent east of the Mississippi. This became known as the French and Indian War in America and the 7 Years' War globally. New France had a modest and widely dispersed population of only about 60,000 colonists and wisely allied with several powerful Indian tribes, including the Algonquian, for strategic support. The British colonies, however, had a massive, concentrated advantage, boasting a population exceeding 1 million people, as well as their own Native American alliances, such as with the powerful Iroquois Confederacy. The resulting 6-year conflict was decisive. The financially superior and more populous British forces soundly defeated the French. A major, expensive global war was also raging in Europe at the same time, and once all conflicts concluded with the Treaty of Paris in 1763, the map of North America was fundamentally redrawn. To prevent the British from acquiring everything, France secretly ceded the western half of Louisiana to Spain before the war officially ended. However, after the peace treaty, France was compelled to give the eastern half of Louisiana and all of Canada to Britain. Britain now controlled a truly vast North American empire, having driven France completely from the continent. But victory came at a catastrophic cost. The British national treasury was nearly bankrupted by the years of global conflict. Parliament, facing enormous debt, desperately needed revenue, and made the fateful decision that the American colonies, which had benefited the most from the expulsion of the French threat, should help foot the bill. Britain began imposing a series of highly contested new taxes and duties, like the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts, to pay for the war expenses and the cost of maintaining a permanent British army in the colonies. The colonists immediately bristled, invoking the core principle of British liberty: no taxation without representation. They argued that since they had no elected representatives in the British Parliament, that body had no right to levy taxes upon them. This disagreement quickly spiraled from a tense argument into widespread colonial resistance, from resistance into a fierce fight, like the Boston Massacre, and the battles of Lexington and Concord, and from there into a full-blown revolution. On July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress formally adopted the Declaration of Independence, announcing the separation from Great Britain and marking the birth of a revolutionary new political idea: the United States of America. But the reality of nationhood would take 5 more grueling years of warfare to achieve, culminating in the American victory at Yorktown and the final Treaty of Paris in 1783. After winning their freedom, the newly independent Americans faced an immediate paralyzing crisis. The weak government they had created under the Articles of Confederation was failing fast. The original 13 colonies were functioning less like a unified nation and more like 13 quarrelsome independent countries, unable to regulate commerce, raise taxes effectively, or manage debt. To save the failing republic, the Founding Fathers convened the Constitutional Convention in 1787 to write a new, stronger document. They created the United States Constitution, establishing an entirely new, functional federal government, with a system of checks and balances, 3 distinct branches of power to manage a large republic. This structure became official upon ratification by the 9th state, and in 1789, the revered war hero George Washington was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States. At the close of the 18th century, the United States was still relatively small, confined east of the Mississippi River, with much of the land to the west belonging to Spain, which technically controlled the vast Louisiana territory, or claimed by other powers. How did America grow so quickly from this eastern strip to a continental nation? Across the Atlantic, Napoleon Bonaparte seized power in France, determined to build a grand European and American empire. He persuaded Spain to secretly return the Louisiana territory to France in 1800 via the Treaty of San Ildefonso. For Americans, this raised an immediate critical alarm. They desperately depended on the Mississippi River and the vital port of New Orleans to transport goods from the interior to global markets. Napoleon's control of this artery was a major economic and strategic threat. President Thomas Jefferson, deeply concerned, promptly approached France with the simple offer to buy the city of New Orleans. Facing an imminent and costly war with Britain, and realizing his vast American empire would be logistically indefensible against a British invasion, Napoleon made a stunning, pivotal calculation. Selling the land would provide immediate cash to fund his European wars, and would ensure a friendly, grateful United States that would perpetually distract Britain. In 1803, the United States purchased the entire Louisiana territory, a massive 828,000 square miles, for $15 million. America had instantly and peacefully doubled its size overnight, securing the entire Mississippi River Valley. This expansion was perfectly timed, as the American population was in a period of exponential growth, nearly doubling every 20 years. With a high birth rate, there was a desperate need for new land and economic opportunity. Americans poured westward in a movement that would soon be codified by the phrase manifest destiny, the belief that the United States was divinely ordained to expand across the continent. These pioneers pushed into lands used for centuries by numerous Native American tribes, leading to decades of forced removals and conflict. Further territorial acquisitions followed rapidly. In 1819, America bought Florida from Spain through the Adams-Onis Treaty, which also formalized the border between the U.S. and the Spanish-controlled territories in the West. Just 2 years later, Mexico won its independence from Spain in 1821, creating a new, vast southern neighbor for the United States. Mexico's northern territories were sparsely populated and difficult to manage and govern from Mexico City. Consequently, the Mexican government, attempting to stabilize the region, invited Americans to settle in Texas under the condition that they become Mexican citizens and abide by Mexican law. The American settlers, primarily from the southern states, soon outnumbered the Mexican population by a factor of 10, and friction over cultural differences, religion, and the settlers' continued desire to practice slavery led to a revolt. The Texans broke free to create their own independent republic in 1836. Initially, the U.S. declined to admit Texas due to the explosive and divisive issue of slavery, which threatened to upset the balance of power between free and slave states in the U.S. Congress. But in 1845, Driven by the popular belief in manifest destiny, the United States reversed course and annexed the Republic of Texas. Simultaneously, the British and the Americans peacefully resolved their competing claims to the Pacific Northwest by agreeing to a division of the Oregon Territory along the 49th parallel in 1846, in just 50 short, tumultuous years, through a mix of extraordinary luck, shrewd diplomatic deals, and decisive, if controversial, warfare. The United States now stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from sea to shining sea. With the nation seemingly complete, an immediate internal crisis erupted: the problem of slavery. The acquisition of vast new territories reignited the furious national debate over whether slavery would be allowed to expand into the West. In the North, slavery was deemed a profound moral evil that had to be contained and ultimately abolished. In the South, it was defended as a peculiar institution, a fundamental and indispensable part of the labor system and economic structure that produced massive wealth from cotton and tobacco. The long-simmering argument over states' rights and the future of slavery reached a breaking point with the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. Lincoln, running on a platform that explicitly opposed the expansion of slavery into any new territories, was seen by many in the South as an existential threat. Fearing he would use federal power to abolish slavery entirely, most of the slave states rapidly seceded from the Union and formed their own country, the Confederate States of America. This act of separation triggered the devastating Civil War in 1861. The ensuing conflict was the most traumatic period in American history, costing over 620,000 lives, more than all other American wars combined until the Vietnam era. It was a massive industrial conflict that tested the limits of American democracy. In 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing slaves in the Confederate States, transforming the war's purpose from merely preserving the Union to a moral crusade for human freedom. The North, with its superior industrial capacity, rail networks, and population, ultimately prevailed. When the war ended in 1865, the nation was ravaged, the slaves were freed, and the difficult work of reconstruction began, ensuring that the United States was united once more, but now forged in blood and committed to a more perfect free union. Following the Civil War, America entered a period of rapid industrialization and expansion of its global interests. A new opportunity arose in 1867 when the Russian Tsar Alexander II, heavily indebted and fearing the territory was indefensible against a British invasion, offered to sell the territory of Alaska to the U.S. Negotiating late into the night, U.S. Secretary of State William Seward agreed to a price of $7.2 million, acquiring a massive, resource-rich landmass, a deal initially ridiculed as Seward's folly, but soon proven to be an extraordinary bargain. By the late 19th century, the focus of American ambition began to turn beyond its continental borders and toward tropical islands and global naval power. American businessmen, primarily sugar planters, had already gained massive economic and political control of the Hawaiian Islands and lobbied the U.S. government to annex them. While President Grover Cleveland opposed the annexation, believing America should not misuse its power to take advantage of the weak or to overthrow foreign governments, others feared that if the U.S. did not act, a rising rival power, such as Germany or Japan, would seize the strategically vital islands and use them as a future military base against America. This presented a profound new question for the American public and its leaders. Should the United States return to its traditional policy of minding its own continental business? Or should it now mind its own global, strategic interests? This foreign policy question was soon put to a decisive test in Cuba, which was fighting a brutal, desperate war for independence from Spain, one of its last remaining colonies alongside Puerto Rico and the Philippines. The Cuban struggle was sensationalized by the American press, and public sympathy for the revolutionaries grew immensely. In February 1898, after the American battleship USS Maine mysteriously sank in Havana Harbor, a wave of outrage swept the country. The U.S. issued an ultimatum for Spain to leave Cuba or face war. Spain, determined to hold its final imperial possessions, responded by declaring war. The resulting Spanish-American War was brief and decisive. The U.S. quickly captured Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, effectively bringing an abrupt end to the centuries-old Spanish Empire begun by Columbus. During the conflict, the U.S. also acted to annex Hawaii in July 1898, solidifying its role as a key Pacific naval base for its growing fleet. After the war, President William McKinley was tragically shot in 1901, and the young, energetic Vice President Theodore Roosevelt unexpectedly ascended to the presidency. A staunch believer in American power and global engagement, Roosevelt immediately set his sights on a strategic goal: a canal across the narrow isthmus of Central America that would allow the Navy to move rapidly between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. When Colombia refused to allow the U.S. to build a canal through their province of Panama, Roosevelt provided decisive military support to a separatist movement, resulting in the establishment of an independent Panama. The new nation immediately granted the U.S. the perpetual right to build and control the canal zone. Finished in 1914, the Panama Canal was an engineering marvel and a strategic game-changer. It allowed the now formidable U.S. Navy, which Roosevelt had personally overseen, to become one of the largest in the world, to quickly and efficiently project American power globally. The United States, having completed its expansion across the continent and secured key strategic outposts in the Caribbean and the Pacific, had irrevocably entered the age of world power, just as the devastating clouds of World War I began to gather over Europe. The journey of the United States, from an overlooked colonial outpost to an industrial giant and a global superpower, is a thrilling narrative of expansion, ambition, internal conflict, and technological adaptation. These monumental events and decisions continue to shape the geopolitical landscape of our modern world. The United States did not inherit its position. It was forged through critical turning points: the securing of the Mississippi River, the relentless westward expansion, the survival of the brutal Civil War that settled the question of national unity and freedom, and the aggressive projection of naval power across two oceans. This history is vital to understanding the present. If you want to witness more compelling historical journeys like this, make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. Please also take a moment to like, comment, and share this video, as your engagement helps us tremendously. Remember, this captivating historical animation is designed to make the past both engaging and entertaining, and all content is based on the meticulous research of respected historians, with references always provided on screen. Stay tuned for the next chapter in American history.